All right, so today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make a sculpture, and the type of thing we're going to be using is polymer clay or air dry clay. So the first thing you want to do is you want to come up with a rough sketch. So here I'm going to do like a winged creature type thing. And after you do the rough sketch, then what you want to do is you want to kind of think about what the armature needs to look like. The armature is the thing that keeps the inside of the sculpture strong and sturdy. So this armature is going to be made out of wire. I'm using a thinner wire so that it's easier to cut and easier to bend. So the first thing you want to do is you want to draw kind of like what the skeleton would look like. So here I'm drawing from the neck, or the head, the neck, the spine, and the tail. And then mine's going to have wings, so I want to figure out what the bone structure would look like in those wings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the wire, and I'm going to essentially trace what I've just drawn, but using the wire. So I'm going to start at the head, and then I'm going to slowly work my way back. I'm just going to pinch as I go. So if you need to, you can kind of grab with both of your fingers and pinch it in order to be able to bend it, but it should bend pretty easily. And then after you get to the end of the tail, then what you're going to do is you're just going to double up the wire. So you can use a pencil if you need to hold it in place, or you can just use your fingers. And your goal is to twist it all the way up until you get to the hip bones. Once you get to the hip bones, that's whenever you're going to start the legs. Make sure that when you're twisting, twist it as tight as you possibly can. The tighter the twist, the better the result's going to be, and the stronger it will be. When you get to the legs, you want to think about the distance that it needs to be away from the body, because you want to think that your creature is going to be thick, so it's not going to be like super narrow. So add a little bit of extra length to the legs so that it can count for like the hip bones or the shoulder bones once we get up to the upper parts. So now what I'm doing is I'm just twisting it all the way back up. So once you get down to the bottom of the foot and you've included the extra length for the hip bones, you twist it all the way back up to the spine. And then what you want to do is you just want to bend the wire down so that it's even with the other leg, and then just twist it all the way back up. You want to make sure that both of the legs are about the same size, and don't forget to accommodate for the size for the hip bones as well. So once you get the back legs done, then you're just going to twist it all the way up the spine until you get to the shoulders. Once you get to the shoulders, you're going to do the same exact thing that you did last time. So you're just going to twist it all the way down, or you're going to line it all the way down. Don't forget to include the distance that you need for the shoulder. And then once you get all the way to the bottom, you're just going to twist all the way back up. And then afterwards, you're just going to go and add the second leg and make sure that it's about the same size. If you do accidentally have some legs that are uneven, you can just cut off the extra length. All right, so because mine has wings, once I get done with my two legs on that same spot, I'm just going to go ahead and go out for my wings. So the wings are going to be connected in the same spot that the two arms in. So after I go out for the length of my wings, then I'm just going to twist it all the way back up. And then once I get to the shoulder area, then I'm just going to go ahead and do a second wing that's the same length, and then I'm going to twist it all the way back up once more. So I want to really once again stress that you should twist it as tight as you can. You don't want to twist it so tight that you're going to break it, but like you don't want to have like giant loops as you are twisting. So here I'm demonstrating if you want horns, like a deer or something like that, what you do is once you twist all the way up to the end of the head, you're just going to create loops. I usually do just two. If you want like multiple horns, you might need more. So, and then you're just going to take a little extra piece of wire that you cut off, and then you're going to twist it around on there, and then cut the horns in half, and then you're just going to twist those two pieces together. So now you have two separate horns that have doubled up, therefore the wire's thicker. So after you have finished making your wire armature, then you're just going to go ahead and start posing it. So this you might have to use some references in order to understand how the body moves. But once you finish posing it, then what you want to do is you want to make sure that it's balanced. You want to make sure that if you push on it, it's not going to collapse or fall over. So you might have to move the legs around and stuff, or move the body in different ways. So here I've kind of bent it just a bit. All right, so once you're finished posing it, then what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and add some tin foil and some tape in order to bulk up the sculpture. If you think of the wire as the bones, you want to think of the tin foil as like the muscles. So the first thing I'm doing here is I'm just creating like an X pattern with the tape on the joints. So where the shoulders and wings are connected, and also where the feet are connected at the bottom, and the head as well with the horns. And then afterwards, what you're going to do is you're going to start off with small pieces of tin foil just around those joints, and really kind of crunching that tin foil so it's really attached to there well. That keeps the legs from wiggling around. After you finish securing the legs in place to the spine, then what we're going to do is you're going to do the torso. So here in my sketch, my upper torso is a lot bigger than my lower torso. So what you're going to do is you're going to take some tin foil and you're just going to crunch it around the armature. What I'm doing is I'm adding more to the bottom and less to the top, so I'm just kind of gently crunching it first and then leaving a little bit of softness to it so that whenever I crunch it up to the body, it can wrap around the wire, because I want most of that tin foil to be below the body, not above it. So kind of like tweak it as you go until you're satisfied with the shape. So here what I'm doing is I'm doing the leg. I do want the shoulder down to about the elbow to be fairly thick, and then slowly get thinner as it gets further down. You don't have to add tinfoil to the bottom of the leg unless your leg's really bulky and thick. So here you can see that I'm just slowly working my way down and that I have secured it in place with some tape. You want to make sure that it's going to be sturdy. So if you notice that your legs are moving as you go, just kind of reposition them. And you want to make sure you're looking at it from different angles to make sure that you are satisfied with it. When you get to the back leg, you want to make sure that the thigh is thicker than the other part of the leg, even more so than the front legs were, because most animals' thighs are thicker because they have to use more muscle mass in that area. So here you can see it goes from a thick thigh, then it goes slowly thinner, and you just do that on both sides. Be very careful not to make it too big because you don't want your sculpture to look awkward, so make sure that you're looking at it from different points of view to make sure that it's not too big or too small, and add tinfoil if you need to, and don't forget that you can use tape to help secure it as well. So if you have any like loose floppy tinfoil that's just not holding on very well, just feel free to tape it. I wouldn't suggest mummifying it, but do the best that you can. So here I'm adding the head. What I do is I just get like a little ball of tinfoil with an extra piece that's a little bit longer, and then I just wrap it around the neck and that front part. Now, because mine's going to have a muzzle, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add more tinfoil to it. So I'm going to wrap it around the head, and then I'm just going to scrunch it at the very front for that muzzle shape. Now, keep in mind that you are going to be adding clay to this, so make it smaller than what you need it to be, okay? So here what I'm doing is I'm just pressing in with a pencil to create eye sockets. You don't have to do that, but it will help you later on if you're trying to get it more realistic. Here we are just bulking up the neck, just adding tinfoil and continuing to add it until I'm satisfied with the thickness. If it ends up being too thick, you can always squeeze it to make it more stiff, or you can just take some off. And here you can see that I'm slowly adding some thickness to other areas of the body. Now that I'm looking at it, some parts seem too thick and some parts seem too thin. So now I'm going to start with the tail. So for the tail, I'm going to use a long strip that I fold in half, and I'm going to start on the spine, and I'm just going to twist it around the wire. Keep in mind that some parts of the tail are thicker and some parts are thinner. Some parts you might have to add more tinfoil or just squeeze less so that it keeps its bulkiness. So here I'm kind of flattening out the tip of the tail so that I can have some space for like feathers at the end of it. All right, when you get ready for the wing, it's very important that you kind of pose the wings first so that you know where you're going to have them at. And then if you have anything thin like a wing, you just want to take a really large piece of tinfoil and fold it in half over the wing, and then just scrunch it around the wing on the outer part of the wing so that it's going to make that thicker and more sturdy. And then you can just rip off the ends where you want to shape the wing. And if it's too small, feel free to just add more tinfoil. Just make sure that you're ripping or cutting off the excess. And then if you have any parts that are like really open, just add tape to help hold it all together. So I would strongly suggest tape the bottom of the wing to the body, and even wrap that tape around the belly if you need to. It should be able to pass the wiggle test. If you can grab the wing and it doesn't like fall off, then you're good. But if you grab the wing and you notice that the tinfoil is loose or it's kind of like flopping around, you need to secure it more. So here I'm doing the second wing. Make sure that the second wing is the same size as the first wing, so make sure that you are measuring, and just do the same process. Make sure that you're taping it to secure it, and make sure that it is pretty sturdy, so give it the wiggle test again. If it doesn't pass the wiggle test, then make sure that you go back and secure it even more. So here I'm putting more tape on the bottom because it didn't quite pass. All right, so here what I'm doing is I'm just changing up its pose a little bit. After you have the armature done, you really want to make sure that it can hold its pose just fine. So here it's passing the wiggle test again, and I'm making sure that everything is how I want it before I start the clay process. Now that I'm satisfied with my armature, I can now begin adding clay. So to add clay, the first thing you need to do is if you're working with polymer clay, you need to heat it up with your hands. So you just use your hands to warm it up, and it should be stretchy. If you pull it apart and it looks like it's breaking, it's not warm enough yet, so just wait until you can pull it apart and it looks as though it's a raindrop. So what you can do is you can use the bottom of your palm, like the round part, to kind of squish it. You can use your fingertips, or you can use like a rolly pin or a marker that you can roll around. I personally like using my palm. What you're going to flatten it out until it's super, super thin, and then you're going to start just adding layers of clay onto the sculpture. You want to have just like one really thin layer all the way around the sculpture. So this should be just a little bit thicker than a piece of paper. You don't want it very thick. This first layer is just the first pass, and this is just to cover the tinfoil and the wire and stuff. So make sure that this is as thin as you can get it without it looking too like brittle. Like if it looks like it's about to tear, need to make it a little bit thicker. So here I'm just warming up some more clay. You can warm up large batches as you go. I usually just warm up small batches at a time. That way it stays soft. The clay is just easier to work with when it's warm. So here you can see that thickness. You want to keep it fairly thin. And then just as you go, I usually just like kind of like rip and tear it in order to be able to fit it. You don't want to overlap it too much. You want to overlap it just enough so that you can blend it using your fingers, but you don't want to have like 3 layers in one spot because otherwise it's not going to cook evenly. So just continue covering it. I would suggest wait to cover the legs where the wire is exposed until last, because that part's going to be really fragile and it's probably going to break as you're trying to cover the rest of it. So just cover the parts that have the tin foil on it first. So really make sure that you are paying attention to how you're overlapping it, and try not to add too much clay in one spot, and make sure that you are not missing any areas. Now on this part, be very patient. I know that it's very time consuming to do this part, but this is one of the most important steps. If you don't do this step correctly, then it will not work out very well for you. So as you add on another piece of clay, make sure that you go ahead and blend it. All you have to do is just use your finger and just kind of pet it over and over until that clay smooths out. The clay is very responsive to heat, so don't put it in the microwave or anything. It'll actually ruin the clay. But if you just use your fingertips and just kind of like rub circles into the clay as you're trying to blend it, or just pet it back and forth, the heat in your hand will help kind of almost melt the clay, not like all the way, but melt it good enough so that you can actually smooth it out to an extent. So another thing that you can use to smooth the clay is if you have any rubbing alcohol, like the medicine stuff. If you have any of that, that can also smooth out the clay. But I wouldn't use too much because otherwise it's going to make the clay kind of sticky. So be careful if you are worried about smoothing. Don't use too much of that, but that is something that does work. Water works to an extent, but water is also going to make it a little sticky. So just be mindful of what you're using and test it out in a small area. If it doesn't work, then just try something else. All right, so when it comes to the wings, make it as thin as you possibly can. If you have anything that is really delicate and very large and it's going to end up being very heavy, make it like literally paper thin. So make it as thin as you possibly can. So here I am squeezing it out. I'm rolling it out and pressing it out, and then I'm going to use my fingertips and just squeezing it over and over and over and over until I can get it as thin as possible. So I'm trying to make it as paper-like as possible. And then I'm just using that very thin sheet, and I want to wrap it around both sides. I'm being very careful not to overlap too much. I'm just overlapping just barely so that I can blend the clay together. You don't want the wings to be heavy. If they are heavy, then they will not be able to support themselves. So it's so crucial that you have the thinnest layer of clay as possible on those wings. So once you finish covering one side, make sure that you check the other side and see which parts you still need to cover. Usually I kind of like wrap the clay around the back side as I'm going. So something very important though is on this part, notice that I'm attaching it to the body and then moving it up to the wing. You want to make sure that that part's a little bit thicker so that it can help hold the weight of the wing. So don't go too thin on the particular part where it's attached to the body itself. But for the rest of the wing, keep it as thin as you possibly can. So also use your fingers to kind of scrunch it and push it so that you kind of like stick the clay to the actual foil. You don't want to just like set it on there. You want to actually squish it on there so you can actually like lay it down on the table or whatever you're working on in order to help keep that somewhat flatter and to smooth it out more. So here, I'm just doing the same thing again, so just wrapping those really thin layers. Something that I'm doing here is my fingers got tired, so it was really hard to get that thin of a layer, so I just used a jar. It's just a glass jar that I think like a spaghetti sauce came in. And then I just kind of pressed it against that glass jar, and then it was able to roll very easily off the glass jar. So if you don't have rolling pins and stuff, or if you don't have like, I don't know, like pasta rollers and stuff, you can use some just things around your house. Just kind of like look around and see if there's anything you can use. Make sure that if it's not yours that you ask permission first. So this is just a recycled jar I drink tea out of. I should probably take that paper off. But anyway, so it works out really great for making thin layers of that clay. So make sure that you are blending it as you're going. Here you can see that as I add the clay that I am using my fingers and just kind of like squishing it over and over and over to try to get that clay to blend in together. It's okay if it's not perfectly smooth. You just want to get it as smooth as you personally want for your sculpture. As far as like if it's like really, really rough, it might like not look quite as aesthetic. So keep in mind that you don't want to smooth it out, especially on the edges of the wings. You want to make sure that the edges of the wings are very smooth. Otherwise it's going to look very kind of messy. So make sure that you take the time to take your finger and kind of like smooth out all those rough edges of the wing in order to make it work good. All right, so here what I was doing is I was just showing you that the wings were kind of heavy, so they're weighing it down. Whenever you finish with the wings, all you're going to do is you're just going to take a snake of clay and wrap it around the wire like this. And then you're just going to pinch it over and over and over until it starts forming into one solid leg. And then you might have to add more or take some off. So as you pinch, if it starts getting like to the end of the foot and it starts coming off, just pull off the excess. or if you don't have enough, just add some more on. For the paws, I'm just adding a little lump of clay at the very end, or if I have enough excess, I'm just going to squish it back on there in order to make the feet. It is really important that you are considering the thickness. You don't want it to be too thin, because if it's too thin, it might break, but you also don't want it so thick that it won't be able to bake properly. All right, so I'm almost done. I'm just going to add a little bit on the horns here. So notice I'm doing the same thing I did with the legs, so just spiral it up and then just squeeze off the excess and pull off the extra. So I kind of sort of didn't really know what I wanted to do with the horns because it wasn't in my original design. I decided to go with kind of like antler horns, kind of like a like an Eastern dragon or like a Kirin. And just because I think that those look really aesthetic. So my original thought was going to be like a wolf with wings, but then as I was adding these horns, I was like, I actually kind of just want to make it a weird fantasy creature. So I ended up not doing the face like a wolf, so I decided to keep it kind of more, I guess, random. It almost looks kind of like a weird rabbit, deer, horse thing. So anyway, so here you can see I'm just adding little chunks of clay. So if you add tiny horns like this, it's okay. You don't need to have an armature for something that small. So here I'm just adding the ears. And I'm just, once again, if as long as it's not super long, you don't need an armature for it. You can just add it to it and then just blend it in. All right, so we're pretty much done with this. The only thing else that I'm going to do is I'm going to add the eye sockets. You don't have to do this. It's just a personal preference. I like to have more realistic eyes. So if you add the eye sockets, then later on when you go to do details, it's a lot easier to add the eyes and stuff. All right, so now I'm pretty much done with the first pass of my sculptures. Now I want to figure out ways that I can have it be supported while I'm letting it dry. So for mine, it's polymer clay, so I have to cook it in the oven at 275. It's very important to preheat the oven first at 275. Get an adult to help you with this. If you've never used the oven, please do not use it without adult supervision. Even if you have used it without it, please ask for permission before you use it. So notice that I have balls of tin foil holding up the wings, and I also have it underneath the body. That's just to help support it, because as it's baking, however it gets baked, that's how it gets stuck permanently. So you want to make sure it looks exactly how you want it to before you actually let it bake. Now, if you're using air dry clay, you want to still go and have it supported, except you're not going to bake it. You're just going to let it dry overnight. Depending on how thick you made the clay, you might have to make it dry longer than that, but make sure that you have proper supports. And if you are using the polymer clay, once it's done preheating, you're just going to carefully put it in the oven. Make sure that before you close the oven that it still looks exactly how you want it to bake. And then afterwards, make sure that you have someone help you put it in the oven. Don't try to do that yourself. Afterwards, you're just going to close it. Make sure it's not at the very top of the oven. You'd rather have it in the center of the oven. And then you want to cook it for just 5 minutes. You can cook it for up to 7 minutes if it's a little bit thicker, but you don't want to cook it for too long because this is just your first pass. After you add details, that's whenever it's going to finish cooking. So here mine has just gotten done. Ignore my messy oven. Something kind of burnt the other night. But anyway, so you just have someone help you. Carefully pull it out with an oven mitt. Do not touch it yet because obviously it's really hot. But also until the clay cools down, it's still very flexible. So be careful not to let your armatures fall down or anything. Make sure you turn the oven off when you're done with it, of course. But let it cool off completely before you start working with it. Be very patient. Don't try to move it until it's cooled down. When it is chilled and it's ready to work with, then what you're going to do is you're just going to start working on details. So here's something that I noticed on mine is that it lacked cheekbones. So I'm just adding a cheek or jaw to it in order to make the face feel a little bit more like a face. So, and this is just kind of sort of up to you where you feel like you need to add more to it. You are not covering the entire thing in another layer of clay. You already have a layer of clay on there. All you're doing is you're just adding details to enhance certain parts of it. So I added some cheeks, and then I'm also going to add the eyes. So here, sorry, it's off camera, but all I'm doing is I'm adding little spheres on the inside of those eye sockets. It looks a little creepy. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to make a little tiny snake. And then I'm going to add that snake above the eye like this, and then I'm going to blend it away from the eye. This creates little like eye sockets with like the eyelid and eyelid on the top and bottom. And then as long as you're blending it away from the eye and not towards the eye, you'll actually have a really nice eye shape like this, so that it looks more like an actual eye. So if you compare the two, one looks kind of more cartoony and the other one looks realistic. So if you're going for a cartoony aesthetic, just putting a sphere in there is totally fine. But if you're going for realism, I would suggest adding an upper and lower eyelid. And some animals, the upper eyelid is a lot thicker. Like if you're talking about like lions and stuff, they have really big upper eyelids. So just kind of take a look at your references if you need to and figure out how you want it to look. So if something does break because you're not being very careful, so here I accidentally bumped the arm against the table. So if it does happen, don't panic. Just make a little cast for it and then blend it to the top and the bottom of the leg. At this stage, since it's only half cooked, it is still very fragile. And even afterwards, like especially if you have something this thin, it's going to be fragile. So make sure that you're being very careful with it as you're working with it. So treat it gently and be very alert of what you're doing. Here you can see that I added a nose. If it's something like a dog, you can just stick the nose on there. If it's more like a deer or something, you can carve the nose into it. So it's kind of up to you what you want to do. And for the bottom jaw, all I'm doing is I'm just adding a sphere to the bottom. I'm sorry, it's off screen. And then I'm just blending it in with my finger. And I'm only blending the bottom part. I'm not blending the top part because I want to keep that little mouth line so that I have a little mouth looking thing. All right, for the paws, all I'm doing is I'm just adding little spheres to the tip of the foot. And then what I'm doing is I'm just blending it up and away from the tip of the foot so that it looks like a little paw at the end. So you can also do that just by adding a chunk of clay and then rolling like a pencil or something against it so that you get those 3 little divots. All right, so now what I'm doing is I'm just adding fluff. All I do is I just roll out little bitty tiny snakes, and then in order to add the fluff, you just stick it to it, and then you only pull it upwards. I usually start from the bottom and work way to the top. So you can make it as fluffy as you want or as thin as you want. I'm going to make mine just subtly fluffy. I was originally going to have it super fluffy, but I kind of like the look of it being smooth. So I'm just adding a couple fluffs, and you don't have to do that everywhere. You can just add it wherever you want to. So I'm just going to add it to the torso. All right, so for feathers and stuff, if you're doing those, the wings are very smooth, so to make it have a feather texture, if you just add like a chunk of clay to the tip of the wing, and then keep in mind that you have 2 sides of the wing, blend it in the front and the back, and then just kind of pinch out a little feather shape. And that's an easy way to create those into the feathers. Now, you don't have to add feathers to the inside of the wing. You can just paint those on. If you really want to add feathers to the inside of the wing, you can. Just take your time and take it feather by feather, or you can roll out a sheet of clay and then cut it out like that. All right, so here's the finished results, and I kind of like how it turned out. There's some things that I would like to go back and add more to, but this is just kind of sort of an example piece. So I like how the wings turned out. I do think I'm going to go back in and add more feathers, and I might add a little bit more fluff for the fur, but overall, I really like how it turned out. It's a very unique design, and I had a lot of fun with it. I can't wait to see what you guys do with your sculptures, and if you need any help, please let me know. All right, thanks, and good luck to you guys.